It's good.
I know.
Mm. My grandmother had a wall that color
Mm.
in her
Brooke
sitting room.
moved to Seoul with 2 suitcases, a design contract, and absolutely no
Oh,
plan to fall for
wow.
her landlord. In her defense, nobody warned her he'd show up to fix a light fixture looking like that. This is a story about a building that was supposed to be sold, a cat that trusted nobody, a landlord who forgot how to laugh, and the woman who somehow fixed all 3 without meaning to. If you're new here, welcome Nesties. Hit that subscribe button and come watch this unfold with us. And before we start, drop a comment below. Have you ever moved somewhere completely new and ended up finding something you weren't even looking for? Let's talk. Brooke landed in Seoul on a Tuesday with her carry-on slightly overweight, her checked bag absolutely overweight, and a level of excitement that made the customs officer raise an eyebrow. She didn't care. She had a contract, her name on an actual brief, an apartment she'd rented sight unseen from a listing that described itself as cozy with character, which she'd correctly translated to mean small, but she was an interior decorator. Small was just an opportunity. The building was on a quiet street in Mapo, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a convenience store that smelled like ramen at all hours. 4 floors, pale yellow exterior that had probably been white once. A row of potted plants along the entrance that someone clearly still watered. She stood on the pavement with both suitcases and looked up at it and thought, yes, this would do perfectly. The unit was on the 2nd floor. The previous tenant had left the walls completely bare, and the lighting situation was, to put it charitably, a tragedy. Brooke dropped her bags, stood in the center of the empty space, turned slowly once, and smiled. She already knew exactly what she was going to do with it. 3 weeks later, it looked like a different planet. She'd repainted the accent wall herself, a deep, warm terracotta that caught the evening light and made the whole room feel like it was breathing. She'd sourced a second-hand rattan bookshelf from a market 2 stops away, strung soft bulb lights across the ceiling, layered 2 mismatched rugs that somehow worked together, and placed a small potted plant on every available surface. The window ledge had 3. The bathroom had 1. She'd named the bathroom one Gerald. Her colleague Yemi, watching through a video call, had stared at the screen for a long moment before saying, "Brooke, you have been here 22 days. I know. You've made it look like you grew up there." "That's the goal," Brooke said, turning the camera slowly so Yemi could see the full room. "A space should feel inhabited, not staged. You named your bathroom plant Gerald. He has a personality, Yemi. I'm not going to just ignore that." Yemi had laughed and told her she was unwell, which Brooke took as a compliment. The building itself was full of life in a way she hadn't expected. There was a woman on the 3rd floor, Auntie Park, as everyone seemed to call her, who propped her front door open most afternoons and somehow always had food on the stove. The smell alone was enough to make Brooke stop on the stairwell every time she passed. There was a young couple on the 4th floor who argued sweetly about everything and always made up loudly enough that the whole floor knew. There was an older man on the ground floor who played traditional music on weekend mornings and had never, in the 3 weeks she'd been there, acknowledged her existence but left a small bag of fruit outside her door the day after she helped carry his groceries up the stairs. Brooke loved all of it, the cat she discovered on day 5. It was sitting at the top of the stairwell like it owned the building, which, given its posture, it believed it did. Gray, medium-sized, with an expression of such profound disdain that Brooke actually stopped walking and said, "Okay." The cat stared at her. She stared back. "I respect you," she said seriously, and went to her apartment. She asked Auntie Park about it the next day. The older woman waved her hand like the question itself was exhausting. "Nobody's cat, everybody's problem. It comes in, eats what it finds, bites anyone who tries to touch it, leaves when it wants." She paused. "Don't try to pet it." Mr. O on the ground floor tried last month. He still has the scar. Brooke nodded gravely. She had no intention of forcing anything on anyone, including a cat, with boundary issues. But that evening she left her apartment door slightly ajar while she unpacked a new shelf, and at some point she looked up, and the cat was sitting in her doorway, watching her work. She didn't say anything, didn't move toward it, just turned back to the shelf. 20 minutes later it walked in, sat beside her toolbox, and watched her finish the job. She called him Socks because of the white on his front paws. He did not respond to the name, but she didn't think he responded to anything, so that was fine. It was the light fixture that started everything. The one above her kitchen counter had been flickering since she moved in. She told herself it wasn't bothering her, then told herself it was fine. Then one evening it flickered 7 times in a row while she was trying to hang a small framed print, and she put down the hammer and said out loud to the empty room, "No, absolutely not." She found the building contact number on a laminated sheet pinned inside the front entrance. Property managed by Kang Holdings, contact for maintenance, a number, and an email. She typed out a message that evening, polite but precise, describing the fixture, the frequency of the flickering, and the specific impact on her quality of life, which she kept professional and did not embellish, except for the part where she mentioned she was an interior decorator and a flickering light was genuinely a form of psychological distress in her line of work. She thought that was fair. She sent it and expected a maintenance worker, maybe 2 business days, a guy with a toolbox, in and out, done. What she did not expect was a knock on her door the very next morning. She opened it in her painting clothes, an oversized vintage tee with a bleach stain on the shoulder, old jeans rolled at the ankle, her locks pulled up and slightly chaotic from sleep, and found a man in the hallway who looked like he had never in his entire life worn anything with a bleach stain on it. He was tall, neatly dressed in a way that felt effortless rather than stiff. Dark trousers, a simple gray shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearm. He was holding a small toolkit with the expression of someone who had packed it very carefully and was already reconsidering the whole endeavor. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Ms. Adeyemi," he said, slightly formal, checking something on his phone. "Brooke is fine," she said. "Are you from maintenance?" A brief pause. Something moved across his face that she couldn't quite read. "I manage the building," he said. "Kang Min-jin." Brooke blinked. "The actual landlord came to fix a light? I received your message. I also said please." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Close, though. "May I come in?" She stepped aside. He walked into her apartment and stopped. She watched him take it in, the terracotta wall, the layered rugs, the soft light strung across the ceiling, the plants on every surface. Gerald presumably doing his thing in the bathroom. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Just stood there, toolkit in hand, looking at the space with an expression she could only describe as quietly stunned. "The light is above the kitchen counter," she said helpfully. "Yes." He didn't move toward the kitchen immediately. His eyes went to the bookshelf, the framed print she'd finally hung last night. The small arrangement of dried stems in a terracotta vase on the windowsill that caught the morning light. "You've been here 3 weeks," he said. It wasn't a question. 22 days, she said. "Are you going to fix the light or just audit my decorating choices?" He looked at her then, and this time there was definitely something at the corner of his mouth. "Both," he said, and walked to the kitchen. He fixed it in under 10 minutes. She hadn't expected that either. She'd assumed landlords who showed up personally would be the type to stare at a problem for a while before admitting they needed to call someone. But he opened his toolkit with quiet efficiency, checked the wiring behind the fixture, replaced a component she couldn't name, tested it twice, and that was that. No flickering. Just clean, steady light above her kitchen counter. "Thank you," she said genuinely. "It was a loose connection," he said, closing the toolkit. "It would have gotten worse." "I know. I could tell it was getting worse. That's why I sent the email." He looked at her. "You described it as psychological distress." "It was," Brooke said without missing a beat. "I'm a decorator. Light is everything. You wouldn't understand." "I might," he said, which surprised her slightly. She put the kettle on before she'd consciously decided to. It was just instinct. Someone was in her space. She put the kettle on. She'd been doing it since she was 12 years old at her mother's kitchen table, and she didn't see a reason to stop now. "Tea?" she said over her shoulder. Another pause. She'd already noticed he did that. Took a small beat before responding, like he was genuinely considering things rather than just reacting. She found it oddly refreshing. Most people just talked. "I have 2 more units to check this morning," he said. "That's not a no," she said. He set his toolkit down on the counter. She made 2 cups, a slightly spiced blend she'd brought from Lagos because she refused to spend her first months abroad without it, and handed him one. He took it the way people took things they weren't sure about, which she also found refreshing. Honest. He smelled it first, which made her smile. "It's not going to hurt you," she said. I didn't say anything. "You made a face." I didn't make a face. "Min-jin," she said, first time using his name, watching to see if it landed. "You made a small face." He looked at the cup. Then he took a sip. She watched something shift. Not dramatic, just a quiet recalibration. He took another sip. "It's good," he said, like he was slightly annoyed about it. "I know," she said pleasantly. They stood on opposite sides of her small kitchen counter and drank their tea. And for a minute neither of them said anything. It should have been awkward. It wasn't. Outside the window a pigeon made a decision, and then unmade it. The morning light came through in that particular way it did at this hour, falling across the terracotta wall and turning everything warm. Min-jin was looking at the wall again. "You did that yourself?" he said. "The paint?" "Yes. I checked the lease. Decorating is permitted as long as it's restored on exit." "It is," he said. "I know the lease." "I know you know the lease. I was clarifying that I know the lease." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "Do you like it?" He considered it the same way he'd considered the tea. Genuinely. "It makes the room feel larger," he said finally. "The warm tone draws the eye inward instead of to the walls." Brooke lowered her cup slowly. "That is exactly right," she said. "Do you know about color theory?" "No," he said. He stopped. "My grandmother had a wall that color, in her sitting room." Something in his voice shifted just barely. Not sad exactly, just quieter. Brooke didn't push it. She just nodded and said, "Good taste runs in the family then," and watched him come back to himself. It was Socks who broke the moment, appearing from the direction of the bedroom doorway with the energy of someone who had just woken up from a long nap in a place he definitely shouldn't have been sleeping in. He walked into the kitchen, looked at Min-jin, and stopped. Min-jin looked down at him. Socks looked up at Min-jin. "That's Socks," Brooke said. "The building cat," Min-jin said slowly. "He's in your apartment. He lives here now, part-time. He bit Mr. O. Mr. O probably deserved it." Min-jin stared at the cat. Socks stared back. Then, with the energy of someone making a considered decision, Socks walked over and sat directly on Min-jin's foot. Brooke's eyes went wide. "He has never done that," she said. "To anyone. I've been here 3 weeks, and he only just started tolerating me." Min-jin looked down at the cat on his foot with an expression she couldn't fully read. Something was happening in his face. Surprise, yes, but underneath that, something else. Something quieter and older. He bent down slowly, like he wasn't sure it would be allowed, and held his hand near Socks without reaching. Socks sniffed it. Then he pushed his head into Min-jin's palm. Min-jin went very still. "He likes you," Brooke said softly, because she could tell this meant something she didn't fully understand yet. Min-jin stayed crouched for a moment, scratching behind Sokka's ears with the focused care of someone who had done this before, a long time ago, and had forgotten that they missed it. Then he stood up, straightened his shirt, and picked up his toolkit with the manner of a man restoring order to himself. "I should check the other units," he said. "Of course," she said. He moved toward the door. At the threshold, he paused and turned back, and she expected something professional, a note about the lease, a reminder about maintenance schedules. "What's the name of the tea?" he said. She smiled. "Zobo blend. My mother makes it. I'll write down what's in it if you want." He nodded once, like that was a reasonable and entirely normal thing to ask, and left. Brooke stood in her kitchen for a moment after the door closed, cup in hand. Socks sat beside her feet and looked at the door. "Yeah," she said to him. "I know." The second visit happened 4 days later, though to be fair he had a reason. The window latch on the unit above hers needed replacing, and he wanted to check the ones on her floor while he was already there. She opened the door in an apron, holding a paintbrush, with a faint streak of cobalt blue on her left cheekbone. He looked at the streak. "Don't," she said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were going to say something." "I was going to say your window latch might need replacing," he said. and she stepped aside to let him in. The apartment had evolved again in 4 days, a new mirror on the hallway wall that opened the entry point up completely. 2 frame prints she'd done herself propped against the bedroom wall, not yet hung but clearly waiting. Socks was asleep in a shallow basket near the radiator that had not been there on his last visit. "Did you buy the cat a bed?" Min Jin said. "He needed somewhere to sleep that wasn't my actual pillow." "He was sleeping on your pillow?" "He has a preference for elevated surfaces. It's a personality trait." She looked at him sideways. "Are you judging me?" "No," he said. And he genuinely wasn't, she could tell. He was looking at the basket with something closer to amusement than anything else, soft and unguarded, and it looked good on him, better than the careful professional expression he'd arrived with the first time. He checked the latch. It was fine. She suspected he knew it would be fine before he knocked. She put the kettle on. He didn't even pretend to mention the other units this time. He just set his toolkit down and waited. They talked for almost an hour. About nothing important. She asked about the building's history. He gave her the facts without the feeling. She asked follow-up questions that pulled the feeling out anyway. She found out he'd grown up mostly in Gangnam, that he'd gone into real estate because it was the family business, not because he'd chosen it. He found out she'd studied in London, that she'd almost quit decorating twice before she landed this contract, that she considered every space she worked on a kind of responsibility. "You take it seriously," he said. "Of course I do. People live in these places. They wake up and go to sleep inside these walls. That's not nothing." He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked around her apartment, at the terracotta wall, at Gerald on the windowsill, at Socks asleep in his basket. "No," he said quietly. "It's not nothing." By the 5th week, it had become a thing without either of them deciding it was a thing. He stopped by on Thursdays, always with a reason, a notice to deliver, a fitting to check, something minor that took less time than the conversation that followed. She always put the kettle on. He always stayed longer than he planned. Socks had fully abandoned any pretense of neutrality, and now greeted him at the door like a small, judgmental welcoming committee, which Brooke found hilarious and Min Jin found, she could tell, quietly meaningful, even if he'd never say so. Yemi noticed first, because Yemi always noticed first. "You're telling me your landlord just comes over," Yemi said flatly, from the phone screen propped against Brooke's kitchen backsplash. "He manages the building personally. It's part of his arrangement. And he drinks your mother's Zobo blend. I gave him the ingredients. He made his own batch." Yemi stared at her. "Brooke, what? You gave this man your mother's recipe. It's not a secret recipe, Yemi. It's just dried hibiscus and—" "Brooke, your mother's recipe." Brooke turned back to her chopping board. "He asked what was in it." Yemi made a sound that contained an entire opinion and left it at that. Auntie Park ambushed her on a Wednesday. Brooke was coming up the stairs with groceries, and the older woman was simply there, as she often was, standing in her doorway like she'd been waiting, which she probably had. "You and the landlord," Auntie Park said without greeting. Brooke stopped on the step. "Good afternoon, Auntie Park." "He used to come here as a child, you know, with his grandmother." The older woman folded her arms. "She was a good woman, very warm, nothing like the rest of that family." She gave Brooke a long look. "He was a sweet boy, quiet. Used to sit at the top of the stairs and read for hours. His grandmother would bring him snacks and he'd stay up there the whole afternoon." Brooke looked at the top of the stairwell involuntarily, the spot where she'd first found Socks, sitting like he owned the building. "He's different here," Auntie Park continued, "since he started managing personally. I've watched him. The first week he came with a clipboard and a schedule, very stiff, very—" She made a gesture Brooke interpreted as buttoned up. "But lately," she tilted her head, "he smiles more." "That's probably just, he's settling into the role," Brooke said reasonably. Auntie Park looked at her with the full weight of a woman who had lived in this building for 30 years and had no interest in being managed. "He told me last Thursday that my stew smelled good," she said. "He has never in his adult life commented on my stew. His grandmother used to bring him a bowl every Sunday." A pause. "He's remembering himself, and you're the reason." Brooke opened her mouth. "Bring your groceries inside," Auntie Park said, already turning back through her door. "I'll give you some kimchi, the good kind." Min Jin found the memory by accident. He'd come in early on a Saturday to fix the ground floor hallway light, an actual maintenance issue, no manufactured reason this time. He was alone in the building at that hour, most tenants still asleep, the morning quiet in that particular way it got on weekends when the street outside hadn't started yet. He was coming down from the second floor when something made him stop at the top of the stairwell. He wasn't sure what. A quality of the light, maybe. The way it came through the small window at that angle, pale and unhurried. He stood there, and something moved through him, slow and without warning. He'd been 7, maybe 8. A Saturday morning. Same light, same quiet. He'd been sitting on the top step with a book his grandmother had given him. Something about a boy who could talk to animals. He couldn't remember the title now. She'd come up the stairs with a bowl of warm porridge and sat beside him on the step without asking if he wanted company, because she already knew he did. They'd sat there for an hour. He'd read. She'd watched the building wake up around them, greeting tenants by name as they passed, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. He hadn't thought about that morning in years. He sat down on the top step, just for a moment. The light fell the same way it always had. Somewhere below, he heard the distant sound of Auntie Park's door opening, the smell of something cooking reaching up through the stairwell, like a greeting. He breathed it in. He sat there for longer than a moment. He was still in the building when Brooke came down the stairs at 8:30 in her outside clothes, bag on her shoulder, clearly heading somewhere. She found him in the ground floor hallway, replacing the light fitting, toolkit open, an expression of focus that she'd learned meant he was in his head about something. "You're here early," she said. "The light's been going," he said, not looking up. "Didn't want to leave it another week." She stood and watched him work for a moment. There was something different about him this morning. Quieter in a way that wasn't his usual composed quiet. More settled somehow, like a man who had just remembered something he needed. "Are you all right?" she asked. He looked up at her then. "Yes," he said. And then, which was unusual for him, "I sat at the top of the stairs this morning. I used to do that as a child when I visited my grandmother here." Brooke went still. "She'd bring me porridge," he said simply, "and sit with me. She never needed to fill the silence." He went back to the fitting. "I'd forgotten that." Brooke sat down on the bottom step, bag on her lap, going nowhere immediately. "She sounds like she was wonderful," she said. "She was the only person I've ever known who made being still feel like enough," he said quietly. "Everyone else always needed you to be doing something. She just let you be." Brooke didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "I think that's the rarest kind of person." He looked at her. Something in his eyes that she didn't fully know what to do with yet. "You're going to be late," he said. "I'm going to a market. Markets don't have schedules. Everything has a schedule." "Min Jin," she said patiently. "Absolutely not everything has a schedule." He made a sound that was unmistakably a short laugh. Not polished, unguarded. It surprised them both. The call from Director Lim came on a Tuesday afternoon. Min Jin was sitting at his desk in his Gangnam office, which already felt slightly foreign after his mornings in Mapo, and Director Lim's voice was its usual efficient self. "The acquisition team is ready to move," Lim said. "They want to confirm the timeline. End of the year, as discussed?" Min Jin looked at his desk. Clean lines, no clutter. Everything in its place. "The condition period ends in 6 months," he said. "Right. So we're on track. They're planning the demo and redesign for January. Fast food concepts are moving fast right now. They want the site locked before the New Year announcements." A pause. "Is there an issue?" Min Jin thought about the stairwell, the porridge, the way the light fell on a Saturday morning. "No issue," he said. "I'll be in touch." He hung up and sat for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and put it down again and looked at the wall and thought about a terracotta color that made a room feel larger, and a woman who named her bathroom plant Gerald, and a cat that had bitten Mr. O but chose, without explanation, to sit on his foot. He thought about his grandmother's voice saying, "This building is full of life, Minnie. Don't ever let anyone make it empty." He hadn't thought about that in years either. The notice board happened because Brooke walked past it one too many times. It was in the ground floor entrance, a corkboard the size of a large tray, pinned with a water-damaged takeout menu, a notice about bin collection from 2 years ago, and a handwritten reminder to close the front gate that someone had underlined 3 times in increasing desperation. It was the saddest thing she had seen since she landed in Seoul, and she had been ignoring it purely on principle, telling herself it wasn't her building and it wasn't her job. On a Wednesday morning, she walked past it, stopped, walked back, and stood in front of it for a full 30 seconds. Then she went back upstairs. She came back down with a fresh corkboard she'd bought for a different project, a set of push pins in 4 colors, a printed building schedule she'd reformatted on her laptop in under 20 minutes, a small hand-lettered welcome note for new tenants, and a little square card for every floor where residents could pin their own notices. She put a small potted succulent on the shelf below it. She stepped back and looked at it. "Perfect," she said to no one. Auntie Park appeared from her doorway as if summoned. She looked at the board, then at Brooke, then at the board again. "I've been looking at that disaster for 4 years," she said. "I know," Brooke said sympathetically. "The landlord's grandmother used to keep it nice." Auntie Park touched the edge of the new board lightly, almost tenderly. She'd pin little notes for everyone, reminders about each other's birthdays, small things. She looked at Brooke with an expression that was not quite a smile, but held the warmth of one. "She would have liked you." Brooke felt something settle in her chest. "That's a very kind thing to say." "It's not kind, it's just true." Auntie Park picked up the succulent, examined it, put it back. "He hasn't been up to see you this week." "He's been busy. He has an actual company to run." The older woman's tone held an entire novel in one syllable. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" "I'm going," Brooke said. Min Jin saw the notice board on Thursday when he came to check on a reported issue with the second-floor water pressure. He stood in front of it for longer than he'd stood in front of anything in recent memory that wasn't Brooke's apartment wall. The building schedule was clean and color-coded. The welcome note was warm without being excessive. Someone, Auntie Park, from the handwriting, had already pinned a note on the third-floor square that said, "If you need anything, knock on 3B. I always have food." The young couple on the 4th floor had pinned a small drawing of their cat with the words, "If you find her, she's ours. She does this a lot." He stood there and felt the building around him in a way that had nothing to do with square footage or market value. He went upstairs and knocked on Brooke's door. She opened it in her work clothes this time. She had a site visit later, she'd told him last week, her first client presentation for the design firm. She looked slightly nervous in a way she was clearly trying not to show. "The notice board," he said. "The old one was a public health concern," she said. "It was hosting a takeout menu from 2021. "I know. I kept meaning to replace it." He looked at her. "You didn't have to do that." "I know I didn't have to. I wanted to." She tilted her head. "Does it bother you?" "No," he said. And then, quietly, "My grandmother used to keep it. She put everyone's birthday on it so the building could celebrate together." He paused. "I didn't think anyone would do that again." Brooke held his gaze for a moment. "Well," she said softly, "now someone has." He looked at her for a beat longer than was strictly necessary. Then he cleared his throat. "How is the water pressure on your floor?" "Perfect," she said, and smiled like she knew exactly what he was doing. If you're watching this and you feel like you've been here before, someone who walked into your world and just started making it better without asking permission, drop it in the comments. Because that's exactly what's happening here. Don't go anywhere. The presentation went well. Brooke texted Yemi immediately afterward from the building entrance, sitting on the front step with her portfolio bag on her knees. They love the concept. They want full execution. Yemi's response was instantaneous. "I knew it. I told you. I told you from day one." She was still, smiling at her phone when the front door opened behind her and Min Jin came out, clearly also just arriving back, suit jacket over his arm, the particular expression of a man who had been in meetings since morning and was only now decompressing. He looked at her. "You're back early." "The presentation was this afternoon. I told you last week." She looked up at him. "They want full execution. The whole project." Something crossed his face. Uncomplicated. Genuine. "That's excellent," he said, and she could tell he meant it completely. "It is," she said. "Come sit down. I'm celebrating." "What?" he said. "Celebrating." 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 "It is," she said, "Come sit down. I'm celebrating." On the front step. Where else would I celebrate? He looked at the step. He looked at her. He sat down beside her, jacket across his knee, and she thought that 2 months ago this man had arrived at her door with a toolkit and an expression like a man who had never in his life sat on a front step, and now here he was, sitting on a front step, looking, she searched for the word, comfortable, like he fit here. You should call your mother, he said. I'm going to call her in a minute. She'll cry, and then she'll say she knew all along, and then she'll ask about the apartment, and I'll spend 40 minutes explaining Gerald. The plant. The plant, she confirmed. He laughed again. Fully this time, not the short, surprised sound from the stairwell. A real laugh, warm and unhurried, and it did something to the air between them that Brooke chose very carefully not to examine in that moment. Socks appeared from behind the potted plants by the entrance, assessed the situation, and walked over to sit between them both with the energy of a chaperone. He's getting worse, Min-jin said. He's getting better, Brooke corrected. He just wants to be included. They sat there while the street settled into evening around them, and neither of them moved to go inside, and the conversation went nowhere in particular and everywhere at once. Her mother's house in Lagos, his grandmother's sitting room, the color of things, the weight of decisions made before you know enough to make them well. At some point she showed him a photo of the design concept she'd presented, and he looked at it with the same attention he gave everything, and said 3 words about the light placement that were so precisely right that she turned and stared at him. You said you don't know color theory, she said. I don't, he said. Then how did you... I just pay attention, he said simply, to things that matter. He was looking at her when he said it. Brooke looked back at him. Socks sat between them, perfectly still, with the expression of someone watching a very slow but inevitable collision and having absolutely no intention of intervening. The message from Director Lim was waiting on his phone when he got back to his apartment that night. Acquisition team needs a decision by end of month. Confirm we're proceeding. Min-jin sat on his couch and looked at the message for a long time. He thought about the notice board, about Auntie Park's note, about the young couple's drawing of their cat, about Brooke saying a space should feel inhabited, not staged, and meaning it the way most people meant things they'd spent their whole lives believing. He put the phone face down on the coffee table. He didn't reply. Brooke found out the way she found out most things, by accident, through Auntie Park, on a Tuesday morning that had started perfectly normally. She'd come downstairs to check the notice board. She'd been adding a small seasonal print to the corner of it each month, a habit she'd started without planning to. And Auntie Park was in the hallway with the expression of a woman sitting on information she'd decided it was time to release. Did you know he was going to sell? The older woman said. Brooke turned slowly. What? Before he started managing personally. There was a deal already arranged. A corporation. They want to knock the building down and put a fast food chain in its place. Auntie Park's voice was measured, but her eyes were not. Some of the long-term tenants found out months ago. We didn't say anything because we thought, after he came back, after things changed, we thought perhaps he'd changed his mind. A pause. But Director Lim came by yesterday. He was asking about the timeline. Brooke stood in the hallway and felt the floor shift slightly under her. She thought about the terracotta wall, about Gerald on the windowsill, about socks in his basket by the radiator, about Auntie Park's note on the notice board, about the young couple's drawing of their cat, about a little boy sitting at the top of the stairs with a book and a bowl of porridge and his grandmother's hand on his shoulder. She thought about Min-jin saying, I just pay attention, to things that matter, and looking at her when he said it. I see, she said quietly. She didn't go upstairs. She went out. She walked for a long time without particular direction, the way she did when she needed to let her mind catch up to her feelings. Seoul moved around her, unhurried, enormous, doing what cities do, which is continue regardless of what any individual person inside them is working through. By the time she came back, it was late afternoon. She sat on the front step with her bag on her knees and looked at the building, the pale exterior, the row of potted plants someone watered faithfully, the small window on the second floor, where her light burned warm and steady behind the curtain, and felt something that took her a moment to identify. It was grief. Preemptive, quiet grief. For a place she'd made home without meaning to, and people she hadn't expected to love, and a version of herself she'd found here without looking. She heard the front gate open behind her. Min Jin stopped when he saw her. He read her face immediately. She could tell because something in his own shifted, became careful. "Brooke," he said. "Were you going to tell me?" she said. Not accusatory, just honest. Her voice was even. "About the sale." He was quiet for a moment. Then he came and sat beside her on the step, and she let him, because she wasn't angry. She just needed to understand. "It was decided before any of this," he said. "Before I started managing. Before I understood what was here." "And now?" He was quiet again. The kind of quiet that held something heavy. "Director Lim is waiting for my answer," he said. "I know. Auntie Park told me he came by." She looked at her hands. "This building, Min Jin. These people. Auntie Park has been here 30 years. The couple upstairs are planning to start a family here. Mr. O. Even Mr. O, with his scar and his bad moods, he leaves fruit outside people's doors." She stopped. "And your grandmother chose to leave it to you specifically. Not the company. You." "I know," he said quietly. "So what are you going to do?" He looked at the building. At the row of potted plants. At the small window on the second floor with the warm light behind it. He was silent for a long time, and she let him be silent, because she'd learned that about him. He needed space to arrive at things, and the things he arrived at were always worth waiting for. "I called my mother last week," he said finally. "I told her I was keeping it." He paused. She wasn't happy. She said it made no business sense. Another pause, and then something moved at the corner of his mouth. "I told her I was aware of that." Brooke turned to look at him. "You already decided." "I decided the night Director Lim sent the message about the timeline," he said. "I just hadn't told anyone yet." She stared at him. "You let me sit here and feel terrible." "I didn't know you knew," he said. And he almost sounded like he was trying not to smile, which she found outrageous. "Min Jin, I was going to tell you tonight," he said. That was the plan. He turned to look at her fully. "The building isn't going anywhere. I'm having the legal team draft the removal from the acquisition portfolio this week. It stays as it is." He looked at her steadily. "She left it to me because she knew I needed to remember what mattered. I needed—" He stopped, started again. "I needed someone to show me." Brooke looked at him for a long moment. "You're not talking about the building anymore," she said. "No," he said simply. "I'm not." The evening light was doing that thing it did, falling long and golden across the entrance, catching the potted plants, reaching the step where they sat. Socks appeared from somewhere. He always appeared from somewhere, and settled across both their feet simultaneously, an act of such deliberate symbolism that Brooke almost laughed. "He planned that," she said. "He's been planning everything from the beginning," Min Jin said. "I think he knew before either of us." She laughed then, really laughed, and he watched her with an expression that was open in a way she knew was rare for him, that he didn't give easily or often. That meant something precisely because of how carefully he usually kept it. "I like you," he said, while she was still laughing, quiet and direct, the way he said everything that mattered. "I don't entirely know what to do about it, but I thought you should know." Brooke looked at him. "I like you too," she said, "and I know exactly what to do about it." "Of course you do," he said, and smiled, fully, warmly, the smile of a man who had sat on the top step of a stairwell at 7 years old and felt the world make sense, and had spent 30 years forgetting that feeling, and had now, unexpectedly, found it again. Then he leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to redirect, and she didn't redirect. She just tilted her face up slightly and let it happen. A kiss that was quiet and unhurried, and tasted like something that had been waiting a while to occur. Not dramatic, just certain. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself because it already knows it's the first of many. When they pulled back, she looked at him and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "Was that in your plan?" he said. "Obviously," she said. She reached over and took his hand. He turned it over and held hers properly, like something he intended to keep. Socks purred. The evening continued around them. Auntie Park's window opened one floor up, releasing the smell of something wonderful into the air. The young couple came in through the front gate laughing at something between them. Mr. O on the ground floor played his traditional music, the notes drifting soft and familiar through the building like a greeting from something older. The building breathed around them, warm and full and alive, exactly as it was always supposed to be. And that's where we leave Brooke and Min Jin, in a building that almost became a car park for a fast food chain, now home to something neither of them planned for, but both of them needed. If this story got you, please like, share, and subscribe. It genuinely helps us keep making content for the Nesties. And I want to hear from you in the comments. What was the moment you knew Min Jin was gone for her? Was it the tea, the cat, or when he laughed on the front step? Let's talk about